So we'll move on to the next presentation by Dr. Jeanne Mortimer on the seagrass ecosystems and the deep sea of the outer islands of Seychelles. So Dr. Mortimer is a conservation biologist, originally from the US, who has worked to promote conservation of endangered species and habitats, primarily sea turtles and tropical, coastal, and marine ecosystems around the world. Since 1973, she has worked in some 20 countries on 6 continents. Her interest in seagrass ecosystems began all the way back in 1975, while she was doing her MSc study on the feeding ecology of green turtles hunted by Miskito Indians along the Caribbean coast of Nicaragua. She first came to Seychelles in 1981 and became a naturalized citizen in 2007. Since 1995, her geographic focus has been the Western Indian Ocean, especially Seychelles and the Chagos Archipelago. An additional information on Jeanne, she is locally known as Madame Torti, that translates as Mrs. Turtle in Seychelles. So that's how well known she is with everybody of all age groups in Seychelles. So on to you, Jeanne. Mute yourself, please.
Jeanne, can you unmute your video?
I think I'm unmuted now.
Great, we can hear you
right.
now.
Yes, thank you, PS. I'm going to see if I can put my share my screen. Hopefully that will work. And okay, can everybody see this? See my screen? Is my screen
good? Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, the title of my talk is Seagrass Ecosystems, Marine Macrophytes, and the Deep Sea of the Outer Islands of Seychelles. When I say marine macrophytes, what I'm talking about are big marine plants. And by big, I mean visible to the naked eye, because there's an awful lot of very small ones. Now, your macrophytes break down into 2 main groups. You've got seagrasses and seaweeds, otherwise known as algae. Now in Seychelles, in the Creole language, they're all clumped together under the one name, gomo. And it's interesting that people haven't really differentiated very much between the different species. And this is something I'd like to change in the coming months and years. Now, this is typical of what you find on the beach, gomo. And it actually has, in a kind of a blob like this, has several species of both seagrasses and algae. So seagrass is our flowering plants. There's about 55 species worldwide. They're characterized by having flowers and seeds, and they're vascular plants with veins and roots and stems and leaves. In contrast, your seaweeds are multicellular algae. There's about 5,000 to 6,000 species worldwide. So that means there's about 100 times as many species of algae as there are of seagrass. But they're much simpler plants. They have little or no vascular tissue, no true leaves, no roots, no flowers. If you look at this one on the right, you'll see that it's got a holdfast at the bottom, which is not a root. It just is something that attaches the plant to a substrate. And they have blades, but again, those are not really leaves. Those are just a structure that forms the body of the plant. Just to show you a couple examples of algae, so you get a feel for what the algae look like. And then here we move into seagrasses. So you can see seagrasses are quite different. Seagrasses are green. Seagrasses look like terrestrial plants. They've got leaves with veins in them and roots. What else are they? First of all, they're not actually grass. They are, they're called grass, but they're not related to our terrestrial grasses. They're flowering plants. These are some examples of seagrass flowers. They have special features. They grow underwater. They disperse pollen and seed underwater. And this is important because most plants, even aquatic plants, tend to disperse their seeds and pollen above water, but seagrasses don't. There's about 4 families worldwide, 2 to 3 of which occur in Seychelles, and about 55 species worldwide, 9 to 12 which occur in Seychelles, but we're still trying to figure out exactly what species do occur in Seychelles. This is a map of the world which shows the geographic distribution of seagrass biodiversity. So the areas with the really dark green have the most species of seagrass. And so you can see that Seychelles is, although it has a lot of seagrass, it has kind of a medium number of species, about 9 to 12. These are just a few pictures to show some of the most common species of seagrass in Seychelles. I think they're absolutely gorgeous plants. Pay special attention to these oval-shaped leaved plants on the right, because these are the ones that seem to get to the deepest depths in the ocean. Okay, seagrass ecosystems are important. They provide many ecological services. On a broad scale, they produce lots of organic carbon by taking up carbon dioxide out of the water and giving off oxygen. They bind organic pollutants. They remove carbon dioxide from the ocean atmosphere system. And so this is why we call seagrass, they're put in the category of blue carbon sinks. They bring the carbon away from the atmosphere down underneath the sea. And overall, they reduce the impact of climate change. When seagrass takes up carbon dioxide from the water, it makes the water less acidic. Carbon dioxide in the water makes the water more acidic, so it's more kind of like vinegar. And this is a big problem because acidic water melts the skeletons of corals and mollusks. And scientists are very concerned that as the sea is increasingly becoming acidic, that eventually corals and seashells will not be able to form their skeletons, and they'll just disappear because of that. So seagrass making the water less acidic is good for the corals. And in fact, studies have shown that the calcification of corals can be 20% greater downstream of a seagrass bed, as opposed to just sitting out in the open away from seagrass. So they enhance coral health. Another service, they provide habitat for commercially important species of fish. And in Seychelles, this includes rabbitfish or cordonnier, which are commercially important. And we have two Seychellois scientists, Dr. Amir Ibrahim and Dr. Jude Bijou, both of whom have been studying the rabbitfish in relation to the seagrasses. And this paper that I'm showing here came out this year in 2020. So this is great. They also provide ecological services for endangered species, including the dugong. The dugong occurs at Aldabra and it eats seagrass. And then, of course, my very favorite ecological service is that they provide food and habitat for sea turtles. And so for green turtles eat primarily seagrass in Seychelles. And the habitat for hawksbills is seagrass, even though hawksbills don't actually eat seagrass, but they do eat the little animals and that are growing in amongst the seagrasses. Okay, back in the early 1980s, when I first came to Seychelles, I lived in the outer islands with turtle hunters, and there was quite a lot of turtle hunting going on. And when they would kill turtles, I would collect their gut contents. And so over that period, I collected about 50 gut contents from these slaughtered turtles, found that it mostly contained seagrass, and I set them aside with the idea that I would eventually analyze them at some point. And happily, in 2016, I got a student from Swansea University, Holly Stokes. She was a master's student at the time, and she conducted detailed analysis of these samples. And we came out with this paper here, which was published in Marine Biology, that showed that green turtle diet is dominated by seagrass in the Western Indian Ocean. And in fact, more so than any other part of the world. We also did a global survey of green turtle diet. Okay, other seagrass ecological services. They bind the sediments. This is very important, especially during storms. You don't want, all the sediments to be stirred up and thrown all over the place. And if you look here on this picture on the right, you see that the seagrass bed, this is a seagrass bed in cross section. So this is in the Southern Islands. So up here you have a small layer of leaves and a much deeper layer of deep root system. These seagrasses protect coastlines from erosion. because they tend to baffle the currents. They as the currents come through, they keep it from stirring up sediments and keeping the sediments settled. And because your below ground biomass is so much greater than the above ground biomass, it creates stability. And this is where the blue carbon storage occurs in the roots and in the sediments associated with the roots. An interesting point is that tropical seagrasses may tolerate higher temperatures quite well. And so we can be optimistic that moving forward, they may continue to be productive even as the climate warms. Okay, just a very brief history of marine plant research in Seychelles. In the early 1900s, you had the Sea Lark expedition. In the 1970s and 80s, there was a series of smaller studies that were done in the inner islands and at Aldabra by individual scientists. In the 1990s, we had two big expeditions, the Soviet American expedition and the Leiden expedition. And then there was a bit of a gap. And in 2004, there was a mapping project of the Amirans group using CASI remote sensing, which was led by the Khalid bin Sultan Living Oceans Foundation, Seychelles government, and Cambridge University. And they produced this super cool atlas of the Amirans, which is quite a huge tome of maps, but has been very useful to show us what the habitats are in these areas. Again, we went into kind of a quiet period in terms of seagrass until about 2016, when the GEF UNDP Outer Island project was operating, and it had a seagrass habitats in the outer islands component. And I was the consultant on this project. And so we produced written protocols to assess the status of seagrass beds based on the Seagrass Watch methodologies, and also some protocols on how to prepare seagrass herbarium specimens. And here's a picture of Charles Morel in the Seychelles National Herbarium mounting some seagrass specimens. We also did baseline assessments of outer island seagrass ecosystems at Day1 Atoll, Poivre Atoll, Alphonse and San Francois, and Farquhar. And what we were trying to do is to assess the species composition and the seagrass density using this method of throwing quadrats and assessing within the quadrats. This just shows you how we did it at Poivre Atoll in December of 2017. Here's two of our team members looking at the quadrat in the water. And on the map at the left shows where we mapped, where we took data on the seagrasses around Poivre. Each number represents a quadrat sample. So it's quite a bit of work. Okay, then finally in 2019, the Necktown Expedition came into town. And I thought, well, having done this outer island work with the GEF project, this could be a really good opportunity to find out what is happening with the seagrasses and the algae in more inaccessible places, such as deep in the sea and in some of the remote outer islands. So I applied to SACAT and was awarded a grant to join the Amirans leg of the expedition. And the questions I was asking was, what is the spatial distribution of marine plants amongst the islands? How deep do they occur? And what species are there? So the activities for this component involved snorkel and scuba surveys of the coral reefs and seagrass meadows in the Amirans group, and the Neustan sampling of the surface waters, and deep sea surveys, of course. And that involved videos and sample collection from submersibles with people aboard and ROVs without people on board that went deeper. Okay, this just shows you how we did the Neustan sampling through these nets overboard, towed them for a specified period of time, both in the daytime and at night, and then hauled them up. And then we'd clean out the net. And normally what the Neustan scientists were looking for was a nice little sample like you see on the right, which is contains small organisms like small invertebrates, fish larvae, fish eggs, that kind of thing. But every once in a while we would get a big wad of seagrass, and the Neustan scientists hated it, but I thought it was great. So because I was able to take a good look at the seagrasses. I also did the scuba and snorkeling in some of the seagrass pastures. These pictures are from Day1 Atoll, which has really beautiful seagrass. And one thing that's interesting about the seagrass, especially in the species on the left, the thalassodendron, is that it sheds its leaves regularly. Now, it maintains leaves. It always has lots of leaves underwater, but it's very productive ecosystem. It sheds the leaves and they float to the surface and they wash ashore. And so this is what you see on places like Day1, these mountains of dead seagrass leaves. This is actually a very healthy natural process. This provides fertilizer for the plants on shore. And in fact, many Seychelles like to use leaves of algae and seagrass in their gardens. So this is something that people have done here for quite a long time. During the expedition, whenever samples of algae or seagrass were collected, we did a photographic inventory, kept photographic records and kept an inventory of all the samples collected. And this is just a couple of examples of some of the specimens that we collected. Dr. Lidiane Matio, because she gave assistance with the identification of the seagrass and with the algae. Taking algae to species level, though, is very difficult. There's lots of morphological variation within a species, and we're going to need genetic analysis to identify them. Okay, looking at the submersible, let me just say real quick, the deep water videos were analyzed at Oxford by Dr. Paris Stefanudis and Nico Fassbender. And in terms of what live seagrass occurred at depth, what we found was that your typical seagrass was not really found very deep, but your halophila, which I mentioned earlier, was found deep. And this corresponds with previous sightings that we've made at Daros previously, 30 meters, and the Nansen expedition at 70 meters. Another thing that was very important that came out of this was that we saw lots of dead seagrass. There was dead seagrass everywhere. And it was raining down from above all the way down into the deepest reaches of the sea. All these little black stripes are dead seagrass leaves. Nico and Paris put together like a tabulation showing where the dead seagrass was found. And you can see it was found at all 7 sites at most depths, 30 meters, 60, 120, and 250, but especially in the Amirance group. And then finally, the ROVs went down deeper than the submersibles. And this is a screenshot taken at 300 meters, which shows dead seagrass at that depth. And I'm sure we'd see dead seagrass if we just kept going all the way down. But what brings up an interesting question is whether these dead leaves that go down into the deep sea, whether this is another form of carbon sequestration, which will be keeping the carbon out of the atmosphere. So just very, very briefly, in summary, seagrass influences most marine and coastal ecosystems in Seychelles, from the shoreline to the sea surface, to the water column, the seagrass meadows, the coral reefs, the deepest sea, and even the air that we breathe, because it is removing excess carbon dioxide. So I just want to thank all the organizations whom I've been working with over the years with the seagrasses.
Thank you so much, Jeanne, once again for your usual excellent and captivating presentation. For the time being, we do not have any questions for you. Perhaps we will come.
There's one.
We have one popping up. So what depth did you find the seagrass at? I guess the deepest.
Yeah, the deepest was actually only around 30 meters. So we did not find seagrass going down very deep. And it's interesting because, you know, seagrass need sunlight. But it was a question that I was very interested in, just how deep do they go? And so I think we can say that, you know, most of our Seychelles seagrass is probably staying within the 30-meter range or above.